At 6:37 a.m. on December 21, 1944, a 19-year-old American private crouched behind a frozen stone wall outside the Belgian town of Malmedy. Snow covered the ground. Smoke hung low in the air. Somewhere nearby, artillery was still rumbling like distant thunder. Ahead of him, 3 German SS Panzer tanks rolled slowly forward, their engines growling as they moved toward a narrow stone bridge. It was the only bridge left standing in that sector. If those tanks crossed it, 11,000 American soldiers would be trapped behind German lines. The young man's name was Francis Sherman Curry. He was not an officer. He was not a tank hunter. He had never received formal anti-tank training. He had been in combat for just 90 days. What he had was one bazooka with 4 rockets, a rifle, and the knowledge that if he walked away, thousands of men would likely die. 40 German infantrymen moved with the tanks. These were Waffen-SS troops, elite soldiers with a brutal reputation. Just 3 kilometers away, these same units had machine-gunned American prisoners who had already surrendered. The message was clear. There would be no mercy. Francis Curry knew that surrender was not an option. Retreat might save his life, but it would doom everyone behind him. So he stayed. To understand why this 19-year-old private made that choice, you have to understand where he came from. Francis Curry was born on June 29, 1925, in Hurleyville, New York. When he was 12 years old, both of his parents died. He was sent to a children's home during the Great Depression, a place that provided food and shelter but little comfort. There were no guarantees there. No one came running when you were in trouble. You learned quickly how to depend on yourself. That childhood shaped him. He learned to observe before acting. He learned to stay calm. And most of all, he learned that if you wanted to survive, you adapted. At 17, Curry enlisted in the United States Army. He did not talk about patriotism or glory. Later in life, he would say he joined because he needed to get out of that town and start a life of his own. The army gave him structure, but it also threw him into a world he was not prepared for. By September 1944, Curry was shipped to Europe as a replacement soldier. He was assigned to Company K, 3rd Battalion, 120th Infantry Regiment, part of the 30th Infantry Division. The men of the 30th were veterans. They had fought through Normandy and across France. They were tough, experienced, and exhausted. Curry was just another replacement. Quiet. Unremarkable. He listened more than he spoke. He watched how experienced soldiers moved, how they used cover, how they reacted under fire. He did not try to stand out. No one looked at him and thought, that man will change a battle. Then December came. By mid-December 1944, the war in Europe was supposed to be winding down. Paris had been liberated. Allied forces were preparing to push into Germany. Many American soldiers believed they would be home by Christmas. Adolf Hitler had other plans. On December 16, he launched a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest. The plan was simple and desperate: break through the thin American lines, split the Allied armies, capture the port of Antwerp, and force the Allies into negotiations. Germany committed its last reserves. If this attack failed, the war was lost. More than 200,000 German troops and around 1,000 tanks smashed into American positions. The battle that followed became known as the Battle of the Bulge, the largest and bloodiest battle ever fought by U.S. forces. More than 19,000 Americans would be killed. At the front of the German attack was the 1st SS Panzer Division, one of the most feared units in the German army. These soldiers had earned a ruthless reputation on the Eastern Front. They advanced fast and showed little mercy. On December 17, that brutality shocked the American army. Near Malmedy, soldiers from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion were captured. They surrendered. Instead of being taken prisoner, they were herded into a field and machine-gunned. 84 American soldiers were murdered. Word of the massacre spread quickly. From that moment on, American soldiers understood the truth. If the SS captured you, you would not survive. You fought, or you died. By December 20th, the town of Malmedy had become a key defensive position. A single stone bridge on the outskirts of town controlled movement through the area. Built in 1863, it was only wide enough for one vehicle at a time. If German armor crossed it, American units to the rear would be surrounded. Company K of the 120th Infantry was assigned to help hold that sector. But by the morning of December 21st, the company was nearly destroyed. In just 3 days of fighting, it had suffered 92% casualties. Out of 147 men, only 13 were still able to fight. Francis Curry was one of them. German artillery began pounding the area before dawn. Explosions tore through the frozen ground. The air filled with smoke and debris. Then the firing stopped. Out of the haze, Curry saw movement. First one tank. Then another. Then a third. Captain Evan, the company commander, understood the situation immediately. The company was shattered. There was no realistic way to stop 3 tanks and 40 infantrymen with what they had left. He gave the order to fall back. Curry asked a simple question. What happens to the men behind us? Evan told him the truth. If the Germans crossed the bridge, 11,000 Americans would be cut off. They would likely be captured or killed within 48 hours. Curry asked another question. What about surrender? Evan didn't hesitate. He reminded Curry of the massacre just a few kilometers away. Surrendering to the SS meant death. Then Evan said what the manual said. One soldier with a bazooka could not stop 3 tanks. Staying would be suicide. And disobeying orders would mean a court-martial if Curry lived long enough to face one. Curry looked at the tanks again. He looked at the bridge. And he made a decision. He told Evan he would rather face a court-martial than live knowing he walked away while thousands of men were trapped and killed. Evan stared at him, realizing this 19-year-old private was serious. Finally, Evan said that if Curry stayed, he stayed alone. There would be no support. No backup. Curry replied calmly that he had been on his own since he was 12 years old. Captain Evan withdrew with the remaining men of Company K. Francis Sherman Curry stayed behind, alone, facing 3 SS tanks, 40 infantrymen, and the most dangerous army in Europe. But Curry was not thinking like the army manual told him to think. He was thinking like someone who had survived his entire life by adapting. And he was about to turn the Germans' greatest strength, their confidence, into their greatest weakness. Francis Curry stayed low behind the stone wall and studied the ground around him. He did not panic. Panic wastes time, and time was the one thing he could not afford to lose. To his left, about 40 meters away, stood a destroyed barn. Inside it, he knew there was a bazooka and a small supply of rockets. Behind him, roughly 60 meters back, lay a wrecked American half-track. Mounted on it was a .50 caliber machine gun. To his right, about 80 meters away, were the remains of disabled German vehicles from earlier fighting. Scattered among them were abandoned weapons and anti-tank grenades. 4 positions. For different firing angles. All close enough that a fast runner could move between them. That was when Curry understood something the German soldiers did not. They believed they were advancing against an American defensive line. They expected multiple soldiers, fixed positions, and coordinated fire. What they did not expect was a single man who refused to stay in one place. If he moved fast enough, if he fired from different positions, the Germans would believe they were facing many defenders. Not one. In war, belief matters almost as much as bullets. The lead tank was still advancing. Its commander was exposed in the hatch, scanning the area. Curry raised his Browning automatic rifle, steadied it against the stone wall, and fired. The shot struck the tank commander in the chest. He collapsed backward into the turret. The tank's machine gun erupted instantly. Bullets slammed into the stone wall, sending chips of rock into Curry's face. He dropped flat, pressed into the frozen earth, and waited. Tanks had rhythm. Gunners fired in bursts. Curry counted the seconds between them. When the firing paused, he ran. German infantry spotted him sprinting across open ground and opened fire. Bullets cracked past him as he reached the barn and crashed through the doorway. Inside, pressed against the wall, was another American soldier, Private First Class John Swanson. He was wounded and shaken but alive. Beside him lay a bazooka with 4 rockets. Curry did not waste words. He grabbed the launcher. Swanson grabbed the rockets. They moved to the side door. The tanks were closer now, about 240 meters away. Curry loaded the bazooka. Swanson armed the fuse. Curry stepped out, aimed at the lead tank, and fired. The rocket streaked across the frozen ground and struck the tank at the turret ring, the weak point between turret and hull. Fire and smoke exploded outward. The tank lurched, rolled backward, and stopped. The crew scrambled out, abandoning it. One tank was out of the fight. The second tank immediately swung its main gun toward the barn. Curry knew he had seconds. He told Swanson to stay in the barn and keep the Germans focused there. Then Curry ran again. German infantry fired as he crossed open ground, but he reached the half-track and dove behind it just as the second tank fired at the barn. The explosion ripped through the wall where Curry had stood moments earlier. He was gone. Behind the half-track, Curry found the .50 caliber machine gun. The bolt was jammed. He cleared it, fed a fresh belt, and chambered a round. German infantry were advancing cautiously, believing the bazooka team was still in the barn. Curry opened fire. The heavy machine gun roared, sweeping across the advancing soldiers. The effect was immediate. Germans dropped to the ground. Others scattered for cover. The advance stopped. From the German perspective, this made no sense. They had seen bazooka fire from the barn. Now they were taking machine gun fire from a completely different position. This was not one defender. This was a coordinated defense. While Curry held the infantry back, Swanson fired another bazooka round from the barn. The rocket struck the second tank low on the hull. The explosion tore off the left track. The tank lurched, then stopped completely. 2 tanks disabled. German soldiers shouted warnings. Officers yelled orders. Radio operators called for updates. Reports were already forming in their minds: multiple American anti-tank teams, machine gun positions, coordinated fire. None of it was real. Curry abandoned the half-track before the Germans could pinpoint his position. He sprinted toward the disabled German vehicles on the right side of the field. There, among the wreckage, he found M9 anti-tank grenades. Shaped charges designed to punch through armor at close range. He grabbed 4. The third tank advanced cautiously now, its crew shaken by the loss of the other 2. It moved slower, stopping frequently, scanning for threats. Curry waited. He let the tank come closer. At about 70 meters, Curry stood up. German infantry spotted him instantly and opened fire. Curry threw his first grenade toward the infantry. It exploded, killing 2 and forcing the rest to scatter. From the German point of view, this was yet another firing position. The tank commander swung the machine gun toward Curry. Curry threw his second grenade. It detonated beside the tank's right track. The track snapped and slid off. The tank ground to a halt. 3 tanks. 3 hits. The German infantry pulled back, shouting into radios, reporting heavy resistance. They described multiple American positions, anti-tank fire from several directions, and coordinated movement. German command officers listening to those reports reached a clear conclusion. They were not facing one man. They were facing a well-organized defensive force. The Germans paused. They waited for reinforcements. They hesitated. And in that hesitation, the bridge remained in American hands. But Curry was not finished yet. As the firing slowed, he saw something that made his decision even harder. 5 American soldiers lay wounded in open ground, pinned down by German machine gun fire. They could not move. If the Germans regrouped and advanced again, those men would be killed. Every training manual said the same thing. Do not attempt rescues under heavy fire. You cannot save everyone. You will only add to the casualties. Curry did not think about manuals. He thought about being 12 years old, alone, with no one coming to help him. He knew the truth. If he did not act, no one would. The battlefield grew quieter, but it was not safe. Smoke drifted across the frozen ground. Somewhere ahead, German machine guns still covered the open field. The Germans had pulled back, but only a short distance. They were regrouping, trying to understand what had just happened. Francis Curry lay behind wreckage and scanned the ground again. That was when he saw them. 5 American soldiers were down in the open, spread across nearly 400 meters of exposed ground. Some were wounded badly. One was trying to crawl. None of them could reach cover on their own. German machine gun fire pinned them in place. Every few seconds, bullets snapped into the frozen earth around them. If the Germans resumed their attack, those men would be finished. Curry knew the rules. He had heard them in training and from veterans. You do not cross open ground under machine gun fire. You do not try to rescue multiple wounded men alone. You wait for support, for smoke, for nightfall. But Curry also knew something else. There was no support coming. Company K was gone. The sector was barely holding. If he waited, those men would die. He did not weigh the odds. He did not calculate survival chances. He made the same decision he had made all morning. He went. Curry dropped flat and began crawling. Inch by inch, he moved forward. Bullets cracked overhead. Dirt and ice sprayed his face. He did not rush. He did not panic. He moved when the machine gun paused, froze when it fired, and moved again. It took long minutes to reach the first wounded soldier. The man was bleeding badly and could not stand. Curry grabbed him under the arms and began dragging him backward. It was slow, exhausting work. Every meter felt like a mile. The German machine gun increased its fire, trying to cut him down. Curry did not stop. He reached cover and left the man with medics. Then he turned around and went back. Again and again, he crossed the open ground. The second man was worse off. Curry dragged him through shell holes and frozen mud. The third screamed in pain as Curry pulled him, but Curry kept going. The fourth was barely conscious. The fifth could not move at all. 5 trips. 400 meters each time. Under fire. By the time Curry pulled the last man to safety, his arms were numb, his uniform torn, and his body exhausted. But all 5 men were alive. 5 men who would have died if he had hesitated. The German assault never came back with full force. From their perspective, the situation no longer made sense. 3 tanks had been disabled. Infantry advances had been stopped by machine gun fire from unexpected positions. Anti-tank weapons seemed to appear everywhere. Now wounded Americans were being pulled back under fire, as if covered by unseen forces. German officers concluded the area was more heavily defended than expected. They reported facing a coordinated American platoon supported by anti-tank weapons. They were wrong. It was still just Francis Curry. But confusion is powerful. Fear grows in uncertainty. The Waffen-SS thrived on intimidation, but at that bridge, they felt it themselves. They did not know where the next shot would come from. They did not know how many Americans were waiting. So they paused. That pause mattered. American units behind the bridge held their positions. Supply lines stayed open. 11,000 American soldiers avoided encirclement. The German timetable slipped, just a little more, in an offensive that could not afford delay. When Company K eventually returned to the area, they found Curry still there, exhausted but alive. He did not talk about what he had done. He simply reported in. Word spread anyway. Officers investigated the engagement. Witnesses told the same story again and again. A single soldier had stayed behind. A single soldier had stopped tanks. A single soldier had rescued wounded men under fire. The army began to understand what had happened. Curry had not defeated the Germans with superior weapons. He had defeated them with movement, deception, and nerve. He had made himself appear larger than he was. He had turned speed and unpredictability into a weapon. In combat, fear is contagious. Curry had passed it to the enemy. For his actions at Malmedy, Curry was recommended for the Medal of Honor. The citation described extraordinary bravery, repeated exposure to enemy fire, and complete disregard for personal safety in defense of others. On July 27, 1945, Francis Sherman Curry received the Medal of Honor from Major General Leland Hobbs. Later, General Dwight D. Eisenhower reviewed the engagement in detail. In his personal notes, Eisenhower wrote that Curry's actions demonstrated the value of initiative over rigid doctrine. He believed Curry's stand had saved thousands of lives and slowed the German offensive at a critical moment. Curry also received the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, 3 Purple Hearts, and Belgium's Order of Leopold with Palm. But medals were never what defined him. After the fighting around Malmedy finally eased, Francis Sherman Curry did not celebrate. He did not tell stories. He did not describe what it felt like to stand alone in front of tanks. When officers questioned him, he answered simply and directly, sticking to facts. To Curry, what he had done did not feel heroic. It felt necessary. That mindset followed him for the rest of his life. When the war ended in Europe, many soldiers struggled to return to normal life. They carried memories no one at home could understand. Curry was no different, but he handled it in the same way he handled everything else. Quietly. Steadily. Without drawing attention to himself. In 1946, he married Helen Kelly. Their marriage lasted more than 60 years. Friends later said their relationship was calm and grounded, built on trust rather than words. Curry did not talk much about the war, even with family. He believed the past was something you carried, not something you showed off. Instead of chasing fame, he went back to work. Curry took a job at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Albany, New York, where he worked as a counselor. He helped other veterans who were struggling to adjust to civilian life. Many of them carried anger, guilt, and memories they could not escape. Curry understood those feelings without needing them explained. He did not lecture. He listened. That mattered more than any speech. Later, he ran a small landscaping business in upstate New York. The work was physical and honest. He liked it. Eventually, he and his wife moved to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where he worked in hotel convention planning. It was a quiet job, far removed from battlefields and gunfire. To neighbors and co-workers, he was just a polite older man with a calm voice and steady habits. Few knew that he had once stopped a German armored assault by himself. But the military did not forget. Historians studied the action at Malmedy closely. What fascinated them was not just Curry's bravery, but his thinking. He had ignored strict doctrine and adapted to reality. He used movement, timing, and deception instead of standing still. He turned the enemy's assumptions against them. At military academies, Curry's actions were later discussed as an example of initiative under pressure. His stand showed that discipline matters, but blind obedience can be dangerous. Sometimes survival depends on breaking the rules for the right reason. Curry never saw himself that way. When asked years later about Malmedy, he said he was just trying to protect his fellow soldiers. He did not talk about fear. He did not talk about courage. He talked about responsibility. In a rare interview, Curry explained his thinking in simple terms. If the Germans believed they were facing many Americans, they would slow down. If they slowed down, people behind him would live. That was it. That simple idea saved thousands of lives. Francis Sherman Curry also became the first Medal of Honor recipient to be honored as a G.I. Joe action figure, something that amused him more than anything else. He joked that the toy probably looked tougher than he ever did. But those who understood his story knew the truth. Curry's strength was not physical size or rank. It was his calm mind. His ability to see options when others saw only retreat. His willingness to stand alone when walking away would have been easier. He had learned those lessons long before the war, as a 12-year-old orphan who understood that sometimes, no one is coming to save you. On October 8, 2019, Francis Sherman Curry passed away at the age of 94. He left behind a family, countless veterans he had helped, and a legacy that continues to be studied. At a frozen bridge in Belgium, during one of the darkest moments of the war, a single young soldier proved something powerful. You do not need an army to stop one. Sometimes, you only need one person who refuses to step aside.